Can we get a sound check? I guess just a thumbs up if you can hear me. Thank you.
Test, test.
Test.
There we go.
Everybody ready? Yep. Okay. Good morning. Happy New Year. I'd like to welcome everybody to this January 2nd, 2025 meeting of the Mojave County Public Lands and Recreation Commission meeting. Madam Clerk, we get a roll call and then we'll go into the pledge. Commissioner Diaz is going to lead us in the pledge.
Absolutely. Chairman Lingenfelter?
Here.
Commissioner Barlow?
Here.
Commissioner Smith?
Here.
Commissioner Diaz?
Here.
Commissioner Martin? Commissioner Director Letowski?
Here.
And Attorney Esplin?
Good morning.
Good morning. All right, we have a quorum.
Great. If you'd join us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. That brings us to item number 4 on our agenda. I'm excited that this first meeting of this commission, we have a presentation by Jennifer Fielder, who is joining us remotely. She is the Chief Executive Officer of the American Lands Council, and she has an update regarding the federal lawsuit that Mojave County is one of the plaintiffs in regards to the Baj National Monument that was recently created last year by the Biden administration, as well as the agenda the American Lands Council has to take back control of our BLM lands to the states. So we're looking forward to that presentation and discussion. Madam Clerk, do we have Jennifer online?
Yes, we do.
Good morning, Ms. Fielder. If you're with us, I'm not sure if you have a presentation. We can certainly get that up on the screen. Thank you for
Good
joining
morning.
us this morning. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. I wish I could be there with you in person, but thank you for allowing me to participate remotely. And yes, I do have some slides I'd like to put up to talk through, if I can. I would just share screen. And then, Mr. Chairman, I wasn't certain what kind of time frame that you'd like to allot for me. I didn't see that on the agenda. So can you give me a ballpark idea of how much time you'd like to spend on this topic, including your Q&A and discussion?
You know what? I'm not going to put a time limit on it. This topic is so important to Mojave County and our residents that we're just going to, I think it's better to just make sure we have enough time to get all of the stuff that you'd like to share out, and then I'm not going to rush the dialogue and the conversation either. So,
Perfect. Well, it's a 200-year discussion in the making. So I will try to be concise with my points. What I would like to do, with your permission, is some background on the organization American Lands Council and status update on the Utah versus United States lawsuit. That's specifically the one that Mojave County joined with American Lands Council as an amici brief partner. So, and then I'd be happy to take questions and discuss details further. I'm also going to provide you, each of your members, with resource information where you'll be able to go to obtain extensive information on any of the topics that we discussed today.
that's terrific.
Okay, terrific. Well, my name is Jennifer Fielder. Thank you for the introduction. I am a resident of the state of Montana. I am a former Montana state senator. I served 8 years from 2012 through 2020. And then I was elected to the Montana Public Service Commission, where I am the current vice president of the Public Service Commission. And our primary responsibility there is the regulation of the energy industry in Montana. Federal lands, natural resource, and federalism have been my policy strengths throughout my political career. Today, I'm here representing the American Lands Council, which is really directly connected to my passion project, and that is proper control of our public lands, proper management, and constitutional lawful management of those lands. So I do live in beautiful Northwest Montana. I'm an avid outdoorswoman, I should say. Love our public lands, but really have been quite distraught over what I've seen over the years in terms of how they're being managed and mismanaged. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and open slide presentation. All right, are you able to see that okay?
Yes, we are.
Okay, So, the main gist of American Lands Council is that we are America's advocate for better access, health, and productivity on federal lands. And with the realization that there is a better path than what we've been experiencing in our nation for the last several decades. The root of the problem really is depicted by this map, which the red areas show all of the federal land in our country. And you can see that the bulk of that is concentrated in the western United States, where actually over 50% of all the land is controlled or owned by the federal government. And so the decisions for those lands are centered in what I call the black hole of bureaucracy in Washington, D.C., thousands of miles away from where the actual needs and activities of the landscape are taking place. This is a.
Can we ask you to put your presentation on slide view?
Oh, yes, you can. Thank you.
Thank you.
Not sure. Anyone have a tip on how to do that?
Go to the very
Okay, display settings or?
It says slide view, it's underlined at the top. Slideshow.
I'm not hearing you real clearly, sorry.
Click on from beginning in the upper left.
Upper left. I see show taskbar. I'm really sorry. This is
No, appreciate it.
not
I
usual.
think if you go to from beginning under file, it's
Okay.
left-hand corner. From beginning, yeah, right there.
Okay.
And then how did it? If you on slide. Tap on slideshow. It should go.
Miss Fielder,
Mm-hmm.
the top bar where there's file, home, insert, if you just click on slideshow,
Yes.
Click there.
click on it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and then from beginning.
Yeah, I think it might be because I have multiple monitors up, so I'm going to try disconnecting those monitors and just go with the one. Is that better?
No.
Mm.
We
Now
just-
we
Okay.
don't have any slide
You-
showing.
You can just go back to the way that it
Yeah.
was. That's fine.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not, I don't use Teams that much, so.
Well, we appreciate you being on for us. There we go. Sorry to interrupt. Thank you.
That's okay. So can you tell me what you're seeing now?
We're seeing the first slide. Thank you.
Okay, and just the slide.
Well,
Oh.
we're seeing the whole presentation, but that's okay.
Mm.
We can just go back to your original presentation. It's fine.
Okay,
There we go.
there we go. Okay, all right. Thank you, and I'm sorry about that.
Oh, thank you.
So we've got to the map part, correct? Now if I can get it to advance. Boy, I'm really sorry. I'm not.
You go to the bottom, there's two little arrows there.
Yeah, I'm clicking on those. I must need to do it. Okay. All right, so you see the map. Most of you are probably familiar with this. So over 50% of the land in the United States is controlled by the federal government. Those decisions are made in Washington, D.C. So this is actually a depiction, it's an actual photograph of a forest. And you can see that there's a property line that divides this forest. And the left side is federally controlled, whereas the right side is locally controlled. And so there's a distinct contrast in the health of that forest. The left side, the federally controlled side, is neglected, diseased, dead, dying. It's a very high fire risk. It's a liability economically, environmentally, and socially. And then on the right side of the screen, you see the actively managed forest. It's a healthier working forest, low fire risk, and it's an asset economically, environmentally, and socially. And while this picture is of a forest, the same goes with rangelands and grasslands as well. Management has a direct bearing in the health of the landscape. This depiction of the number of acres burned in the 11 western states over the last 100 years or so is really quite striking, because you can see back in the 1940s through about the 1980s, when logging and grazing were prevalent and in use for vegetation management, we had relatively few acres burned. So you can see on this chart that less than about 1 million acres a year were burned during this period. And then we saw these increasing federal regulations implemented in the 1970s. The Endangered Species Act, which wasn't too bad at the beginning, but it's morphed into something that's become very restrictive and frankly is loaded with junk science to lock up our lands. And then you've got the Federal Land Management Policy Act, which had supposed protections and joint use that was supposed to be provided with states and local governments working together, but hasn't worked out that way. And so you've seen this with increased federal restrictions, dramatically increased numbers of acres burned every year. And what we found is intentional mismanagement. When I was in the state legislature, I sponsored and chaired a study of federal lands for the state of Montana, and we conversed with other state task force throughout the West. And what we found was this problem wasn't just in Montana, it was prevalent across the West on National Forest System lands as well as Bureau of Land Management lands. And for example, this land management plan that I was involved in as a citizen prior to running for office, and then later as an elected official once I took office, showed that the selected alternative for this land management plan that the Forest Service had picked for our region would limit their ability as resource managers to respond to fire, wind throw, insects, and disease, and to provide timber or other commodities. That's in their own words. That's a segment right out of their own plan of what they were proposing for the next 15 to 20 year period of land management planning on the Kootenai and Idaho Panhandle National Forest System. And this was just crazy. We also saw other things that were going on that were quite eye-opening, and this also happened in Montana. The federal government actually blocked our state fire crews from going in and putting out fires, and this was when we had a Democrat governor, Steve Bullock, in office, and his administration had dispatched our fire resources to go put out lightning strikes when they were small and controllable in August. And the federal government said, no, those are federal lands, you have to stand down. And as a result, we saw fires increase in size and intensity, and the destruction that followed, and the cost of trying to manage those fires after they were allowed to get out of control was astronomical. We've also seen from their own reports, the federal government has declared that more than 10,000 miles of major electrical transmission lines are at risk on the national forest lands in the western United States. Now, this report came out of the United States Department of Agriculture, so I don't have the data on Bureau of Land Management lands, but I have asked for current data in my capacity as a public service commissioner. I asked for information back in May when they came and gave a presentation to the Montana Public Service Commission. I've followed up with 3 or 4 communications since then and still have not received any answers about what the current status of transmission line risk is on in the western states. But we know back in 2013, when this report was provided to us, that it was 10,000 miles, and these are major electrical transmission lines, not just the other distribution lines that are so vital to the system as well. And I'll just point out that this is the cover page of the report that the USDA presented to the Montana Public Service Commission in 2013, and the title is Forest Health and Western Utilities, but the photograph they selected for the cover is pretty telling. Massive federal fire. So federal fires in the last 30 years, what we've seen in the trending is that the federal government has reduced timber harvest by 70% nationally. And I'm sorry I don't have the grazing figures right now, but we know that grazing has decreased dramatically as well. The federal government has eliminated 1,000 miles of access roads and trails throughout the western United States and other states where federal lands are present. And they've basically allowed our forests and rangelands to become overgrown and inaccessible, feeding the uncontrollable spread of massive wildfires. And it doesn't stop there. We thought this was pretty bad. But what we've learned recently from some wildfire forensics professionals is that they're not only letting the fires burn now, and the fires aren't only accidental because of the conditions of overgrown vegetation and lack of resources and lack of good policies to manage them effectively. We're finding now that more recently, the federal government is actually intentionally enlarging the size of the fires. And these next few slides came from Wildfire Pros. And what they did was shared with us what they found. And there's a few slides here I'd like to talk through, and I'd encourage you to meet with Wildfire Pros and have them give a presentation to you too. They are out of Colorado and New Mexico, and they're former U.S. Forest Service district rangers and administrators. And they now do private forestry, and they've been trying to help impacted private landowners recover costs for the damages caused by the federal government from some of these fires that they've intentionally spread. But this example here is the Pass Fire in 2022. This is over on the Gila National Forest in New Mexico, and it was first the Cooney Prairie Fire. It started with a lightning strike. You can see the red area is the typical burn area. It was the expected area of the fire was estimated at about 75,000 acres because of the winds and southwest winds and everything. That was its natural intended or suspected condition. But the purple area is the planning box that the federal government drew around the fire. So it was initially expected to be about up to 75,000 acres, but this planning area box that they drew around it was around 400,000 acres. And you can see from these slides depicting the fire map that what these Forest Service administrators that were watching this notice, that retired Forest Service administrators were watching this fire, and they were noticing the strange behavior of it and the way it was not growing in that typical southwest elliptical form. It started reaching out and growing in different directions that they thought was very unusual. And so what they did was they started documenting what they were seeing. And from crowdsourced satellite mapping, they could see where the fire was being ignited in other areas, or there was fire igniting in other areas, and they were trying to figure out what was going on here. You can see again in the upper part of the slide, that's the actual area that's burned, and then you see all these ignition, these hot spots that are down south of that. And then this particular slide is a captured screenshot from a social media, the Crew Boss, and they now call it the Black Fire, and it is now the 5th largest fire in New Mexico's history at 120,000, almost 121,000 acres that only 4% contained. So these retired Forest Service administrators are wondering what is going on here. And what they identified was, if you look closely at this map, you can see the active firing operations in the bright red circles on the edges where they're burning on the flanks of the fire. And if you look closely at that, you'll see that all those hot spots, those new ignitions, are in straight lines. And what they realized was that, well, they were using drones to go and expand the fire in these straight lines. And so that was very telling to them in terms of what was happening. And as a result of this kind of management or mismanagement of our federal lands, the story that's not being told enough is the devastation from this. We're seeing millions of animals burned alive in these fires. And it's not just the little ones that can't get away. Large wildlife are entrapped by these things too, like this mountain lion. And of course, the millions of small animals that are being caught up in these, what's happening to them. And it's amazing that the environmentalists and the environmental movement is not standing up for this devastation and saying, wait a second, we need to manage our lands in a way that's more responsible. And so what we're seeing is they call it federal protection, but federal protection nowadays means blocked access and devastated landscapes and miles of fires, toxic air, degraded water, loss of life and property, not just wildlife, but livestock as well, rangelands, ranch lands, economically devastated, depressed, and unsafe communities. But our goal at the American Lands Council is healthy air, water, and wildlife. And this is why I got involved and why most of us that are involved with the American Lands Council are taking part, because we want healthy air, water, and wildlife, as well as abundant outdoor recreation and safe, vibrant communities. And we know that we can get those things through local care, because you tend to get better decisions when they're made by people closest to the subject matter. That's actually a quote from a man named Martin Goldning, who testified during our federal land study in Montana. He was the lead negotiator for the Northwest Territories of Canada in devolving control of Crown lands to the territorial government. And they successfully did this in Canada because they found out that you tend to get better decisions when they're made by people closest to the subject matter. So Canada has gone through this process they call devolution, where they've localized the management and care of the public lands. Has it been done before in the United States? Yes. Western states currently own and manage 40 million acres responsibly. Most of those lands are classified as trust lands. They've been transferred to the states from the federal government as part of our enabling acts of statehood. Can states afford to keep it public? This is a question that's often asked. The answer is yes. Western states outperform the federal government economically by an average of 10 to 1 or better. And you can see from this chart here, this was a study done by the Property and Environmental Research Center. And for every 73 cents, for every dollar the US government spends on managing public land, you'll see that they've been regaining about 73 cents. Now, these figures are a little bit old. They were produced in, I believe, 2013, so it may be even worse by now. But in general, for every dollar spent, the US government was recovering just 73% of its costs, so that they were losing 27% or 27 cents for every dollar. While the state of Idaho, for every dollar they spent managing public lands, was generating $2.80. The state of Montana was generating $8.65 for every dollar spent managing its public lands. And the state of Arizona was doing very well at $13.94 produced from state management of public lands in Arizona. There's three fundamental truths to keep in mind. One, local care of the land, transfer of federal lands to the states has already been done before. The statehood terms are the same for local care and management of lands for all states east and west of the Rockies. We've got the same terms of statehood as each state came into the Union. They're almost identical. And transfer of public lands to the states for local care and management for healthy air, water, and wildlife, abundant outdoor recreation, safe, vibrant communities really is the only solution big enough. We've tried everything else. Local management works better. And so here's where we're at. And the focus of the update today is regarding the litigation. We have to have the correct lawful knowledge of these principles. Number one, when the states set up the federal government, do you think they ever in their wildest dreams imagine that they would be giving control of their states and their resources to Congress? No, the states wanted to remain sovereign states, and they set up the federal government for specific purposes, and they enumerated those in the United States Constitution. But over the years, the interpretation of the Constitution has been subject to much debate and several different court decisions and arguments, some favorable and some non-favorable. So the state of Utah hired a very good legal team back in 2013, I believe it was 2014 perhaps, to produce an analysis of their Transfer of Public Lands Act. Is this really constitutional for the federal government to retain all these lands, and what merits would a case have if Utah were to bring one? And the team they put together were not just cheerleaders in favor of Utah's position. They were actual skeptics, some of them, in terms of whether this was legal or constitutional or not. So they had a very good team that examined this, and after their intensive study, they reported back to the Utah legislature. They were actually, some of them were quite surprised to find how strong Utah's legal arguments were. The lead attorney here, John Howard, pictured here, is the attorney that the American Lands Council ended up retaining to put together our amicus brief, which Mohave County so graciously joined. And we certainly appreciate Mohave County's support and partnership in that. It's been absolutely vital to the success of being able to secure the quality of legal counsel necessary for the complexity of this type of matter. The simple premise is statehood equality. I've pulled out this quote from my own studies of the U.S. Constitution annotated, which pulls out excerpts from U.S. Supreme Court cases on specific clauses of the Constitution. And I really like this one, where it says the right of every new state to exercise all the powers of government which belong to and may be exercised by the original states must remain unquestioned, except so far as they are temporarily deprived of control over the public lands. This was a U.S. Supreme Court decision and then documented by Congress in the Constitution of the United States of America, annotated back in 1938. So how long is temporary? How long should states be temporarily deprived of control over the public lands? And that really is the crux of Utah's question to the court. Is it constitutional for the federal government to retain these public lands within the states indefinitely? Because that's the new policy of the federal government. It's not that new. They adopted it back in the 70s, but they said they were going to retain the land indefinitely. So a few key dates on the Utah versus United States case. First of all, there was a lot of research and development that went into building this case over the past decade or so. But finally, on August 20th of last year, 2024, Utah filed their suit at the U.S. Supreme Court in the court of original jurisdiction, asking U.S. Supreme Court to take up the question regarding the constitutionality of federal retention of Bureau of Land Management land within state borders. And the type of land that Utah is focused on are, they deem unappropriated lands. So their suit does not challenge the constitutionality of appropriated lands like U.S. Forest Service lands, national parks, reserved Indian reservation lands, military lands, or any of those types of lands. Utah's case simply focuses on the land that the federal government is retaining with no specific purpose, unappropriated lands, and those lands are managed by the Bureau of Land Management. In the state of Utah, it's 18.5 million acres at stake in the question, but that constitutional question would, we expect, would be applied to all of the states. In general, there's somewhere around 200 million acres of these Bureau of Land Management lands throughout mostly the western United States. It could be at stake in terms of how the court answers this question. So we had 60 days to file amicus briefs, and the state of Utah asked for our help and others to file what are termed stage 1 amicus briefs, and that is friend of the court briefs, to ask the court to take the case, to demonstrate to the court the broad interest in this question and having this question answered once and for all. And so there were 11 amicus briefs in support of Utah's case filed within that 60-day time frame, and it was a very intense time frame, I must say, because it's a complicated subject, and it does go back through 200 years of law and documentation. So 11 amicus briefs were filed. 7 of those were promulgated by American Lands Council in our advocacy work to reach out to others and help them understand the issue, encourage them to either file an amicus brief of their own or to join on ours if they didn't have the resources to file their own. And in the end, the American Lands Council Stage 1 amicus brief included 27 amici, or 27 total partners that signed on, with Mojave County being one of the very prominent partners involved in that assisted with those legal costs and advocacy costs to get that done. On November 21st, 2024, the federal government filed their brief in opposition to Utah's case, and it's pretty interesting to read their brief. I'm not an attorney, but I can read, and I do see where the answer that the federal government's provided in response are convoluted, twisted, and omit key information, and even provide, in some cases, half sentences. They quote half sentences from the law rather than the full sentence and the full context. So I think, personally, I believe the federal government's case is pretty weak. I believe that if the court takes this case, Utah will prevail. We saw also in November that there was a motion to intervene filed by the Ute Indian tribe of the Uintah and Ouray reservation. So that's the only party that filed to intervene. So we've got dozens of amici, friend of the court, from several states and counties throughout the country, several organizations that are supporting the court taking the case. And then we've got the U.S. Federal government basically saying don't take the case, and then this motion to intervene by the Ute Indian tribe. The Supreme Court will take up the question of whether to take the case or not. We expect that to happen in January, sometime this month. And if the answer is yes, the court will take this as a case of original jurisdiction, then the case will roll forward with oral arguments and hearings, or it may go be assigned to a special master. We're not sure how they will administer the case, but the first question is, will they accept it as a case of original jurisdiction? If they do, that would be ideal, because then we can move forward with this. And then we would go into the stage 2 amicus briefs where legal arguments would be made. The stage 1 briefs, amicus briefs, were filed to demonstrate to the court the broad interest. The stage 2 amicus briefs would be to demonstrate to the court the legal arguments and legal theories supporting Utah's case. So we're hopeful that the court will accept this as a case of original jurisdiction, but we're also aware that it's very rare for the U.S. Supreme Court to accept cases under original jurisdiction. They might do 1 or 2 cases per year under original jurisdiction at best. That's been the trend. So we're not sure what they'll decide. We're waiting with bated breath, and we will find out. It's possible that they will reject the case, but that wouldn't be on the merits of the case. It would be most likely on whether the court wants to take it as an original jurisdiction matter, or if they want to send Utah or direct Utah to take it to a lower federal court first before it advances up to the Supreme Court. So we'll see what happens here in probably the next few weeks. I wanted to point out to you also that as a result of this effort and our work, the American Lands Council Foundation, which is our sister organization, which does research and education related to this cause, has produced the Federal Fault Line series. And for those of you that are really interested in the legal background for this, this is available for you on our American Lands Council website. And there's a 5-part series. These were written by Bill Howell, who's been researching this for decades, and I think he spends day and night of his life researching the legal history. And so we've produced this 5-part series, and each one is a white paper. Some of them are just a few pages. Some of them go up to 20 or 30 pages in length, but they're available online for you. The first one is the 3 instruments of fundamental law. And it's the source authority underlying the property clause of the Constitution for the United States, because the property clause really is the crux, in our opinion, of this question. And then the second part in that series is understanding constitutional statehood. And it's the essential role of the admission clause and the property clause and the state enabling compacts, because those also are very relevant to this question and this issue. The third part is a revealing chronology, and this is kind of a timeline from the Declaration of State Independence to where we are today with the federal land empire. And there's several different court cases and court decisions, and some very contradictory, that are laid out in this paper, which are very interesting and telling, that help us understand how we got to where we are today and perhaps how to unravel it. And then the fourth part is the forgotten linchpin in the case for statehood equality. And this really is centered on the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, which was the document that established the authority for the federal government to govern territorial lands. And then the final one is challenging a federal land empire carved out of a nation of states. And this is an interpretation of the property clause of the United States Constitution under canons of law. And these latter two go into greater depth. The first ones kind of get you started. The latter two go deeper. So you're welcome to take a look at those and review them if you like. Again, they're available on our website, and I'll show you a little bit about that in a bit here. So in addition to the legal case, our position is that we need to legislate with unity and be prepared for that. And so the American Lands Council has over the years developed a proposed federal legislation, which we call the National State Lands Act. And it's a very simple piece of legislation. We've got it drafted. It's about a 4-page bill, very simple. It would allow states to acquire land at their own pace. State legislators would put in applications for conveyance of land. They would identify which land they want, when they want it, and what the purpose of that land is, so that the transfer of lands from the states could go incrementally. Now, this legislation can be done standalone on its own, in my opinion, or it could be a really good companion to the lawsuit if Utah is successful with its case and the court does answer the question affirmatively, saying it is unconstitutional for the federal government to retain these lands, and it is a duty of Congress to divest the federal title to those lands. Then this is a great companion bill, because it would give Congress a simple way that works well for the states and the local governments to start that transfer, and it wouldn't necessarily have to all happen at once. So we're proposing incrementally to allow the states to identify which areas they want, when they want them, to disclose what the purpose of that area, that acquisition would be, and then to be required to administer it for that stated purpose. So there's some sideboards that we propose putting on the states. One of those key sideboards would be that mineral grazing and water rights would have to be protected. Any existing valid rights and uses on the federal land at the time of the transfer would have to be honored by the states. Another important caveat that our legislation, our proposed bill, includes would that states would have to coordinate with the local counties where the lands are located, so that your county governments are in the driver's seat where they should be on making critical decisions for the resources within their county and the impacts management of those lands have on their constituencies. And then number 4, promises to keep it public must be kept. So going back to number 1, where we allow states to acquire land at their own pace, where the legislature has to identify which land they want, the purpose for the land, they'd be required to administer it for that purpose. So if the legislature in their resolution and application for conveyance states that this land will remain public and be managed for recreational purposes or watershed quality or industrial purposes, whatever the legislature says, that promise must be kept. And so that's a caveat of our federal bill too. So there's not a bait and switch that's allowed to happen here. The states would just publicly debate and disclose and vote and pass a resolution stating what the purpose is. And then they would be required under the federal bill that we propose to manage it to that stated purpose. It's pretty simple, and it's a win-win, really, because the resource revenues from proper public land management and enhancement would be available to the states and the local governments. And we expect that those states and local governments that manage the lands and resources wisely would find themselves in a position of having excess funds that would be able to fund other state and local government needs as well. The final aspect of what we're working on, so we've got the litigation, we've got the federal legislation, and then what's really important and where the rubber meets the road, I think with you and your position here as fiduciaries for your county, are to prepare for acquisition of federal lands with care. And even if the possibility came to fruition that Utah was not successful in their case, we still believe that preparing to manage these lands with care at the local level is critical. We believe it's critical if the lands are transferred. We believe it's critical if they're not. So the example that we suggest to be followed by counties and states is a model based in Utah that they developed. And what they did was the state legislature appropriated funding and set up a system where each county would develop its own county resource management plan, and the state set up a public lands coordinating office so that there was support provided to the counties on doing those plans in a way that was included expertise that would withstand litigation, expertise that would lead to sound planning and principles. And so each county adopted a resource management plan, and then the state adopted each county plan into its state management plan. And why this is important, even before the transfer, is because the federal government is required to coordinate with the state on a government-to-government basis. And so this is the document that Utah now has in place for those discussions when the federal government is planning actions in their state, in a certain county in their state. They open up that chapter of the resource management plan and say, okay, here's our objectives, here's our priorities, how do your plans fit with those? And they have this basis for coordination. And if the federal government defies that, they have a basis for successful litigation. But it's good planning, and it's being done from the local level, and the state is facilitating that. I put the website for this on this slide, publiclands.utah.gov/resource planning coordination, because Utah has encouraged other states to use their resources, and they will help you. They will help counties and states to be able to be successful in this endeavor. They believe this is important for natural resource management, again, regardless of how the case goes. So that's an excellent resource. We do have that available through our website as well, and we can link you up with Utah for that. So the place to go where you can find more is AmericanLandsCouncil.org. We encourage you to learn, join, share, and help. We really appreciate those of you who are already members of American Lands Council. I know there's some, I believe, in the room that are individual members of the organization, and we really appreciate that. Mohave County has been a county member of American Lands Council in the past, but has not been a member for the last several years. Our membership is based on membership dues, their annual dues that are paid, and those dues sustain the operations of the organization. Mohave County did contribute to the lawsuit and the advocacy for Utah versus U.S., and we really appreciate that, but that's a separate fund from the membership fund. So we would really encourage leadership within Mohave County to come back and join us again as a member. Our organization does not have any full-time employees that are funded by your membership dues. Those we're about 90% operated by volunteers. So those membership dues actually go to the real expenses of maintaining the organization and being able to do outreach work and some of the background work and some of the promotional work we're doing to share the message and get to members of Congress and their staffs and get to the incoming administration and their team to help them understand the issue and figure out how to promulgate better care, access, and health on our public lands. The Utah lawsuit is one angle, one aspect of what we're advocating, but there's so much more. We are open to doing everything possible that's legal, lawful, that would help lead to better care and management of our public lands with more local decision making, driving the management decisions and the ultimate outcomes of the land management. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your time. There's two buttons on that lawsuit or on that website. One is join ALC and one is support the Utah lawsuit. So you can find a great deal of information there, and I'd love to take questions or further discuss this with you all.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for the very detailed presentation, Ms. Fielder. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open it up to our commissioners, and I'm just going to go right down the line per district, and then we can have them ask you the questions that they have to you, and we'll start with Commissioner Barlow. Commissioner Barlow, did you have any questions for Ms. Fielder?
Yeah, I have one or two. So in regards to the fires, I'm curious, what level of the government does that directive to grow the fire come from?
Thank you, Commissioner Barlow. That's a great question. From what I've been able to ascertain, the term is called administrative intent, and it comes from regional supervisors. And I've talked to incident commanders on fires in my area of the state and found this to be their answer. And that is that it's the regional supervisor's office that determines what the administrative intent is. It then directs those incident teams on how they are to manage the fire. And the questions I asked as a public service commissioner of the Forest Service when they were before our commission last April or May was, what does that administrative intent process look like? Who is involved in those decisions? How is it documented? How is it communicated? And that is a large black hole of information that I don't have and have not been provided by the federal government. And I think we need to do some more digging there to determine where that's coming from. But administrative intent seems to be the key that the incident commanders are pointing to and the district rangers are pointing to in terms of what's driving the expansion of the fire areas. The other factor is Ron Wyden, the Democrat senator from Oregon, recently introduced legislation to encourage and expand the use of fire, particularly on federal lands in the western states. And so I think by researching his proposed legislation that's now, was put before Congress during this past quarter, might lead to some more answers there. And I haven't had an opportunity to go in and fully research that, but those are two leads that need to be tracked down and determined, and then working with the Trump administration perhaps, and the new Congress coming in, perhaps we can restore some sanity to unravel this decision to burn it all up, basically lock it up and let it burn instead of manage it wisely.
Okay, great. Thank you. Commissioner Smith.
I have no questions right now.
Commissioner Diaz.
I always have questions. Thank you for the presentation. It was very well done. And first question I wrote down before we even started was why the mismanagement, but I think your presentation showed why. I wanted to get a question answered. The acres burned, do you feel that they're doing that to, in the increase in acres burned to perpetuate this climate change narrative? Just want to get your thought on that.
Thank you, Commissioner Diaz, for the question. I think there's a variety of reasons for why they are intentionally burning. Some managers believe it's the only solution that they really have, the best tool that they have to manage the landscape, because of federal bureaucracy and litigation and court decisions that have tied their hands from being able to effectively use timber management and grazing to manage their fuel loads. So they're now using fire as the first tool in the toolbox instead of the last tool in the toolbox. But yes, there are definitely those who want to push the climate change narrative and blame everything on climate change. And as you can see from some of the slides I presented, where there's a contrast between federal management and local management, you can see a difference in the health of the landscape. And so climate change didn't just decide to adversely affect the landscape on the federal side of the property boundary. But yes, there's a lot of money behind the climate change agenda. And there's a lot of profit to be made by those who are on board with that. And so, yeah, I believe and see the signs that that burning it up and telling people that climate change is the reason for those fires is actually supporting a profiteering agenda by some of the industries that are profiteering from the climate change narrative.
Right, and did you? I wanted to clarify. Did you say some of these hot spots, when these fires are much bigger than they originally are planned or estimated, are started by drones? You're thinking? Is that what you said?
Yes, the federal government is using drones to drop incendiary devices to ignite fires to expand fire boundaries.
Okay. And then the last question I have is, you mentioned the dollars produced by states trust lands versus that are managed by state trust land versus federal government, and Arizona does a great job. You said $13 per versus the 73 cents. Can you explain that a little bit further for the layman, please? What you mean by dollars generated? What those dollars are?
Sure. Thank you for that question. So the states manage their public lands for resource protection. They manage them under environmental law for environmental quality as well. But most of the state trust lands are under a mandate to produce revenues for the beneficiaries in their state. And in most states, those beneficiaries are the public schools is one of the leading beneficiaries. So a lot of people call these school trust lands. So the state has a mandate, each state has a mandate to manage their trust lands in a way that benefits the beneficiaries. So they have timber programs, mining programs, energy programs, recreation programs, all different types of programs, state parks, different things like that, that generate revenues that then benefit the schools, or in some cases it goes to roads and other things. So each of those types of trust land that were transferred from the federal government to the state had a specific purpose, and the state land boards are required to manage the lands to benefit those beneficiaries. So it's proper timber management, good resource management is producing revenues for the states. The federal government also used to generate positive revenue. Particularly the Forest Service used to be able to generate positive revenue through good forest management, but that trend started reversing in about the 1990s when they started changing policies and philosophies on how to manage the lands. And that's when we started seeing the Forest Service go into the red on land management. There's the study that documents these figures from Property and Environmental Research. It's called Divided Lands, and that's also linked on our website. But it also shows how many people, staff members that the federal government has per acre of land versus how many the state has per acre of land. And the states are just much more efficient at managing the land than the federal government is.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you. Commissioner Supervisor-elect Martin.
Thank you for that presentation. It was very well done, and I think it would be really, really great if the American public could see that, because that is the feeling of all of us. Our public lands are not being managed right, and we've lost control of them. And I'm just wondering, do you believe that the American Lands Council will have a good, positive working relationship with the new administration?
And thank you for the question and the compliment, Commissioner. Yeah, I think we'll have a better relationship with the incoming administration of President Trump by far than we've had with the Biden administration. The Biden administration tended to basically advocate these problems that have led to the devastation of our environment and our communities. And the Trump administration, the past one was more proactive, and we hope the next one will be very bold in doing the right thing for our federal lands, and that is decentralizing control and moving toward local care and management in any lawful way that they can. We hope that the court will give a good hearing to this issue, and we hope that the new incoming Congress will actually pass some sensible legislation. I think there's a lot of different balls that could be up in the air on this, and we'd like to be involved in steering those. We'd love to get this message out to the national audience, and our organization has been in existence since 2012, and we've done everything that we can to get the message out, but we're really limited in our resources to do that. We don't have the funding that the liberals have. We don't have the funding that the Lock It Up and Let It Burn crowd has. So that's where those county memberships are so critical and so vital to help us develop this type of information and then get it out there in the public eye. So I think with education, people will see the light. Most of the audiences that I've been able to present to, in fact, all of the audiences that I've been given an opportunity to present to have been favorable to what we're proposing once they see what it's really about. And we're quite open to criticism and questions, but as long as we can have fact-based discussions, we tend to win the debate, because unfortunately, just a lot of people don't know what's really going on out there on the landscape. Those in the rural areas tend to know because they're out there and they see it. But the population masses are congregated in urban areas and city areas, and to reach those people costs a lot of money, takes a lot of resources. And so that's part of what the membership money does from our dues paying members, is allows us to get to major events in major metropolitan areas and share our message so that those people who truly care about the environment and care about communities can learn the truth about public land management and help us be successful in ensuring that we do get that better access, health, and productivity. That's our goal.
I have another question for you. When we talk about climate control and how it affects it affects all of our parts of the country, do you have any input on this geoengineering? We see the contrails and we see the chemtrails, and the government hasn't been really forthcoming about this geoengineering, where they're actually changing the climate and controlling the climate in areas through this aerial spraying and stuff. Has the American Lands Council been involved or looked into that at all?
No, the American Lands Council really hasn't taken that up. I can tell you that as a legislator, I've reviewed some of that information, and I know that our recent legislature, which I was not a member of, but my husband is, took up the issue of cloud seeding and things like that, and whether that should be allowed in our state. And so I've got some old textbooks, children's textbooks from the 1950s and 60s that are discussing climate manipulation that the federal government was doing back then. So it's not a secret that our government has been working on climate manipulation in different ways for different reasons over the past several decades. But in terms of American Lands Council involvement, no, we have not got involved in that. We've really just been focused on care and management of the lands and the objectives of trying to improve that access, health, and productivity on the ground.
I know that looking at the information that's out there, what they're doing is affecting, it's not not only just the landscape, but it's affecting the people, it's affecting the animals that are on the landscape, and it has a negative effect on everybody. And it's just, I think it's something that in conjunction with what you folks are trying to do and what I think local government is trying to do to find out about these things and how they all interact. Because if there is factual information out there that they're changing the climate, that can manipulate the climate in the forest, that's going to have an adverse effect to set up these fire scenarios if they're able to do that. So it might be just something to look at in the future to see if those kind of issues are related. I mean, if they're being able to control the climate to figure out where they want things to grow and where they don't, then that could definitely have an effect on the total system that we're dealing with here. But I do thank you for your presentation and your information. It's very valuable. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. As I recall, that was one of the key points of the debate in Montana on cloud seeding was there's only so much moisture in the atmosphere, and when you seed a cloud to get some rainfall on croplands in one area, then you're depleting that atmosphere so that you're not getting the rainfall in another area. So there was this debate about, well, where should we let it rain in our state and not let it rain? So big issues, very important issues, but I really believe that if we can localize care and management of our public lands, we can see stronger states and stronger counties that are going to be better positioned to take on other more challenging issues as well in the future. But right now we're really quite crippled. And it feels much to me like my understanding of colonial America. The colonies were prohibited by England, by Britain, from manufacturing their own products. They had to send the raw materials to England for manufacturing, and then they had to buy the finished goods back from England. And it was a way for the mother country to control the colonies. And I really feel like we're being treated a lot like those original colonies where we don't have our full freedoms. And once we do receive those full freedoms, I think you'll see our states and our counties prosper and become better positioned to participate on the national level in other important issues.
Thank you.
Any other questions from our commissioners before I get into it? Commissioner Barlow.
So I'm curious, do you think location has relevance to where they would let these fires grow bigger?
Well, this is just my opinion, but I feel like they're picking on us in the rural areas. Yeah. I think that's where they started with these plans, like the excerpt I showed on the I think it was 2013 forest management plan in my area, where we found they were using junk science, by the way, to push their lock it up, their diminishment of the amount of access roads. And I think they were picking on us because we're just, low population, and they probably figured, they could get away with it in our area. But I don't know for sure. It just feels like they're picking on the little guys to me.
Thank you.
Ms. Fielder, again, with the other commissioners, I want to say thank you for your presentation. It's very informative, very enlightening. I've been following the state of Utah's case and also Arizona's case on the Baj National Monument. And I know that the state of Arizona has filed suit against that new national monument determination. Mojave County has joined that. Colorado City of Fredonia has joined that. So we're following that, but we're also following this Utah case. This Utah case is very interesting, and I think that it falls in a time, or it's occurring in a time with the first 2 years of the Trump administration, where we all know there's going to be this real push against federalism. And I'm very excited to be going into those first 2 years, especially with our new state senator from Legislative District 30, Hildy Angus. She's been involved with state lands and these federal land questions for quite some time. She's also a member of the newly created state of Arizona Federalism Committee. So I'm looking forward to Mojave County and others having some very close vertical alignment with her. I'm going to ask her to come up to the podium in just a little bit here to say anything that she wants to say. But I've gone through some of the filings of this state of Utah versus the U.S. And first of all, I think everybody needs to understand that the state of Utah has hired a law firm out of California called Clement and Murphy. And these guys are the real deal. They have the most recorded wins in the U.S. Supreme Court and of any other law firm out there. They're expensive, but I think that it's worth it. And I don't think that they would have taken this case if they didn't think that there was at least a chance of being successful. And no firm like that is going to take a case if they don't think that there's a chance to be, if there's not a chance to be successful, they're not going to take the case. And I think at the core, you mentioned the core of Utah's case are these unappropriated federal lands. The definition, correct me if I'm wrong, but the definition of appropriated, basically it's lands that include military bases, forts, national parks, those types of things. Anything that is unappropriated, those are the lands that the federal government has not formally reserved to support a federal power enumerated in the Constitution. And that's what this lawsuit is really directed at. I just read that the state of Utah, through their attorneys, they just filed additional papers on December 4th, 2024, that appear to back off from the original demand for complete divestiture, and instead they're asking that the federal government begin the process of disposing of its unappropriated federal lands within Utah. And so they're targeting the validity of existing statutes is what it looks like, namely portions of the 1976 Federal Land Policy Management Act that implement an indefinite land retention policy. Obviously, that's directly contradictory to the original intent of public land management. You look into the history, and I know you've mentioned it, the enabling acts where the federal government made promises through state enabling acts that lands within their boundaries would be disposed of and returned to the states. That hasn't happened in the West. Also, something I didn't hear, but I know that it's probably incorporated in the American Lands Council's work, is the equal footing doctrine, which basically stated that states admitted to the Union were to be treated equally to the original 13 states. Yet that hasn't happened. The federal government continues to control the majority of lands in the West. And again, Mojave County has, and I know our Senator Angus has been pushing this for a number of years, that the local governments that are closer to the people and deeply invested in our lands are far better equipped to manage these lands sustainably and responsibly. So how do you feel about the first 2 years of the Trump administration, where we know there's going to be this this push against federalism, and how do you think that that our state representative, our state senator, other states in the West, American Lands Council, the counties, how can we all best vertically align to push this message over the next 2 years?
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you for your astute comments and observations. It's wonderful to see how focused you are on this and how knowledgeable you are. That's wonderful. Former county commissioner and incoming state senator Hildy Angus has been a real champion for this for a long time, and it was under her leadership that Mojave County was a member, a dues-paying member of American Lands Council in the past. I think as far as how we move this forward, we have to concentrate our efforts. We need Mojave County back as a dues-paying member. We need every county that believes in this to join as dues-paying members. It's amazing how many say they support what we're doing, but they're not willing to join and pay dues to sustain the operations. And those operations are real and cost real money. And so we need to have some fuel put in the gas tank in terms of membership dues in order to bring our message effectively to members of the administration. We have some good relationships with those people. We've been developing those relationships with these people at the federal level since our inception. And so we just need to continue to develop those and to work those and to provide the right information to the right people and have the right resources within our organization to be able to spend the time to work on this. Like I said, we don't have any full-time employees. So everybody that's with American Lands Council is doing this in their free time. And as you know, most busy people are already busy people. And so we have a limited amount of time and energy that we can put to this. Membership dues help us get the right professional people that we need to be able to spend the time and effort on it. One comment on federalism, I just want to say that federalism is a term that I think is a bit misunderstood. I just want to clarify that we are pro-federalism, and in its true sense, federalism is the separation of powers between levels of government. That's proper federalism, is recognizing the jurisdiction of the federal government versus the state governments, that and the balance of those powers and where that jurisdictional line is. So that is federalism. And so we are pro-federalism. We want the principles of federalism to be respected and enforced. And that is that the way the founders set it up, if I can give a depiction here with my hands, the federal government was set up with a sphere of influence, a sphere of jurisdiction. With my hands here, I would show it as like a 3 to 4 inch diameter. That's their sphere of jurisdiction. All other powers were granted to the states through the 10th Amendment. And so the sphere of the state jurisdiction is much, 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 much larger. And so what the federal government has been doing is ignoring those principles of federalism, and it's been taking more and more power and expanding outside of its actual sphere of lawful jurisdiction and into the state's jurisdiction. So we support federalism, and we support it being upheld, and those principles of keeping the federal government within its sphere of jurisdiction and allowing the states to provide the other governance that is required and needed in its state is what we're advocating on it.
And that's really what I meant by my comment, where the federal government has really abused this concept and has taken upon itself more and more control, almost from well, I wouldn't say almost, definitely from a paternalistic sort of a standpoint, where they're acting almost as a parent and telling us what we can do and we can't do, and that was never really the original intent.
That's correct.
So
Thank
we
you.
need to push back on that. I want to take this opportunity, if I can, to ask our state senator from LD30, Hildy Angus. I know that you've been a champion for our public lands as a county supervisor for a number of years, and I'm very, very excited that you're going to be on this new federalism committee at the state legislature, and we look forward to working very closely with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Jennifer Fielder, I've known, everything's kind of come full circle, hasn't it, Jennifer? When American Lands Council first started with Ken Ivory and Jennifer Fielder, the mission was to go out and explain these issues to people, because people don't get it. We get it somewhat, but we learn more. And that was sort of the focus of it then, just to inform people and then hopefully take action. And there were many years, in fact, Ms. Fielder and I and Ken Ivory and now Representative Harriet Hageman went through Washington to educate, and it was really interesting and educating to see how little a lot of our representatives knew about this issue. And everyone seemed interested, but of course, like anything, it kind of went dormant. And yes, Mojave County, I did push Mojave County to become a member, but then we had some issues with our budget and things appeared. Apparently it wasn't, but the perception was things kind of quieted down on the American Lands Council, although I do know that they were doing work, and I was always notified of all that. But I would recommend that Mojave County become a member, and I know I'm going to become a personal member. I know Gene Kench is a personal member. That's that important. And as I enter the state Senate in the federalism, and I believe this is why the Federalism Committee was reestablished. They had had it at the state, and again, because I think things were dormant for a while, but now we have all this activity. And I'm just thrilled about this lawsuit. It sounds like it's just happened, but right, Ms. Fielder, is she out? Can she speak to me? Jennifer,
I
that
can.
you guys did so much work, and I'm just thrilled that we're at least hopefully might get our hearing about the constitutionality of all of that. And I will do anything in my power to help that out and help Mojave County, because I do think this is one of the most important issues facing us today. You know, when you went through your presentation, it brought back a lot of memories. We really focused for a while on the wildlife. I don't think people think about that when they hear about wildfires in the homes that have been lost, you know, but the animals, and they don't want to talk about that because that's the emotion. We had this like a plan. We called it Smoked Bear, and people didn't like it, right, Jennifer? People don't like to think things like these things. They don't want to think that it's happening, and it is happening, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. And we see the fires that are hotter and ruining lands for generations. They were never this hot. And so this is all, I mean, I'm really excited because it's bringing back all of that from years ago that, as I go into the state Senate, to think that we're doing this again and hopefully get some results, some positive results, because I do think we have a lot of advocates in Congress. Congressman Paul Gosar, our congressman, has been a huge advocate, and I know his mind is always turning, and he has ideas about grazing, how to use the Grazing Act and do everything towards this end. So, Ms. Fielder, you can count on the state, you can count on, I hope, I can't speak for Mojave County, I have to get used to doing that. But I think you'll be able to count on Mojave County for help in anything, and I personally wish you and American Lands Council good luck and prosperity. Thank you. Any questions for me?
Any questions for Senator Hughes? Mr. Diaz.
I just want to say, as a member of the newest member of Lake Havasu City Council, where we're surrounded by BLM land, I look forward to working with you on these issues because it is very important. And thank you for being here today.
You know, years ago, and Don Martin will remember this, we were told by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that they were going to end this trout stocking program. That is a prime example of the mismanagement and the ulterior motives for all of that. And the ulterior motive for that, which we did not realize at the time, was the expansion of the Endangered Species Act, which gives the federal government more power over what we do here. But it was, you know, you talk about how much money is raised on every dollar. That trout stocking program, which fed our fishing industry here in Mojave County, brought in, it was, I think, and I hope I don't misquote this, but I think it was the most successful program dollar-wise, bringing back on what the federal government invests. And without notifying us, without an economic impact study, without an environmental impact study, they just took it away. And I think that was a real insight. All the things they would make us do, they didn't do, and there were ramifications from that. Because they didn't do an environmental impact study, we had the rise of something called the caddis fly, which has taken a decade to just get a hold of, you know? There's always unintended consequences to anything that the federal government does. And I say that without any hesitation, that local control, the people that are closest to the land, have the best in mind for that land, and not bureaucrats out in Washington, D.C. So thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me up, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. We do look forward to working with you. We haven't touched much about it, but you know, Mojave County, it's not just these devastating wildfires that you hear about in the West, but it's also after the fires are out, you have to worry about these incredible mudslides, and I mean, not only that, but it seems like almost every year the western states, the counties, Mojave County has maybe 10% private lands, and we have to go, you know, beg for something called payment in lieu of taxes because we don't get property taxes off those lands, and it's like pennies on the dollar that we get on these federally managed lands, so it negatively affects our economic development. So we really do hope that the Supreme Court takes this up. Mojave County is proud to join the American Lands Council in their amicus on this. Also, the state of Arizona's lawsuit against the Baj Monument. Half of that monument is in Mojave County. It's actually in my district, District 1, up north. But without any sort of a water study, because one of the things they said was the uranium is poisoning the water. Well, it's actually not. We found a study that was done by 3 offices of the federal government that looked at that area specifically, and they came out with scientific conclusions that said that the uranium is not contaminating the water. The original intent of that new Baj Monument was to incorporate not only federal lands, but also about 40,000 acres of state trust lands and about a little over 12,000 acres of private property. Mojave County was successful, if you can call it success, in getting those state and private lands omitted from the eventual monument boundaries. But we still want to try to take advantage of the Trump administration and get that revisited. I know that the first administration of Trump, he significantly reduced the size of some of the federal monuments, and we're hoping that he would still be willing to do that for us. So again, Ms. Fielder, would you be willing to do a presentation to our new Mojave County Board of Supervisors sometime early in the year?
I'd be delighted to.
Okay, terrific.
And I would bring on some of our other executive committee members as well. That we have our executive committee is predominantly former county commissioners. So I think some of those fellows, Doug Heaton and Alan Gardner in particular, that have been really involved in the Public Lands Steering Committee of National Association of Counties and other county organizations. And one of our board members is also Howard Hutchinson, who's involved with the Arizona New Mexico Counties Coalition as the executive director. So I'd love to bring in some friends for that discussion.
Great. I've only got one more question. How organized are we right now in the West on these issues? Because I think, the first thing that you have to do when you don't have as much resource, you don't have as many resources as the other side has, is to make sure that you're closely organized.
Yeah, I feel like structurally we're in good shape. We've got, we've got the lawsuit now that Utah's spent a tremendous amount of resources in developing. We've got our legal theories that we're looking forward to supplementing Utah's case with if the court takes it up. And then structurally, this Transfer of Public Lands Act, or what we called the National State Lands Act, is a really sound piece of federal legislation that our organization put together about 8 or 10 years ago, and we've shopped it out to our entire membership and other organizations and individuals for critique, and nobody has offered improvements to it. So I think we've got a really simple, sound piece of legislation, and it's just really important to be organized as people, as states, and as governments to come into this movement together. And that's why that one slide is titled Legislate with Unity. If there's unity behind those basic principles that we've got in that proposed National State Lands Act, I think we can get this done. And the key would be then let the other debates happen within the state houses of each individual state, and take those debates out of the congressional halls and put them into the state houses where they belong.
Senator Angus, did you have another comment? Come on up, please.
I'm glad you brought up NACO, National Association of Counties, because we joined the public lands. How it was presented to this board was that NACO was going to be in charge of this sort of a information warehouse of public lands. So I wanted to ask Ms. Fielder if you're working with them. Are they advantageous for us to work with? Do you know anything about it?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Senator Angus. The National Association of Counties adopted in their policy position support for county control of the federally managed lands. They put that into their their national policy statement several years ago as the result of American Lands Council member work. But they've also got a lot of other things in their policy statements that are contradictory to that. So, whatever the members vote in at the national conference is included in their policy statements, and not all of it really jives with other segments. So NACO can be a really great resource if counties and county leaders are really engaged and really involved in steering it in an effective way. Same as your state county organizations. Those can be really effective, but it really takes effort and work by county commissioners to be engaged and involved and stay on top of all that. My experience is that with some of these state county organizations, the major metropolitan areas tend to control the staff because the major metro areas, the largely populated counties, are paying more dues, and so staff tends to be more responsive to them. But it's another form of republicanism where those county representatives get a vote at the meetings too. And if the rural counties are more involved and more engaged, then I think you can steer your state county associations really well, and also the same at the national level.
That's right. And we tend not to show up because of all the things you just said. The larger counties are in control, but we don't show up, and then we complain about policy. He who shows up creates the policy. So we have to be better at that. But I'm talking about one committee in particular that was presented to this board that we should join, and it came with at a monetary cost. So maybe this new board can ask for an report on what they're doing and make sure that they're in the same ballpark that we are, and that we're not funding something that is counter to what our outcomes are.
Well, I would say that, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
I agree with that. I think that that's very important for Mojave County to do in the future. I know that there were a couple of representatives that were going to be participating in that, but we were going to help pick up the bill. We want to make sure that
Right.
Their policy positions are the same as ours, or is that really the best?
I'll look
use of
forward
money?
to seeing that. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, if I may just follow up on that, the American Lands Council has stayed true to its purpose for being, its original mission, since we were formed in 2012. And we haven't deviated from that, even though there's been tremendous forces to get us to go different directions. And there's a lot of different directions you can go. So you can count on American Lands Council staying true to what we've presented here today and what our sole focus is, and that's better care and access on our public lands in a way that's in alignment with constitutional law. And I don't think there's any organization out there that's going to do more or be more effective in helping you if those are your objectives. So I would definitely suggest joining American Lands Council and doing everything you can to get others to join us so that we can grow, and there's strength in numbers, but our numbers are relatively few compared to what they should be.
Well, absolutely. Again, we just want to thank you for your participation today, for your time. Mojave County, I'm sure we're going to have some more conversations about this at the Board of Supervisors level. Before we let you go, I want to ask one last time if any of our commissioners have any last comments for Ms. Fielder. Hearing none. Again, thank you for your presentation, and we look forward to hopefully working with you in the future.
It's been a true pleasure. Thank you all, and Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year. Thank you. Very good. Well, that brings us to item 5, commissioner comments and requests for agenda items for our next meeting. I'm going to go down the line and start with Commissioner Barlow. Commissioner Smith.
Yes, I'm going to try to get together with BLM for our next meeting and see if I can get a representative to come and explain to us why they're not following their blueprint for the 21st century with all of their activities coming up to put all this alternative energy on our public lands.
Very good. Thank you. Commissioner Diaz.
Thank you for the presentation today, and thank you for Senator Angus for being here, and thank you for your running the meeting today. But yesterday we went on a hike in Havasu. They do it every year. It's an annual first hike. And I was talking to a couple of the Arizona Arizona Parklands commissioners that were actually doing the tour. They work for Arizona Parks, and one of the things that came up, someone had got all these shells and put them in the sand, and they said, "What are those shells for, or where are they from?" And I was the only one that said it's the quagga mussel, and everyone was there. What? I thought. So there was people there from Montana, from Wyoming, from all these different states. Snowbirds, we call them in Havasu, and we don't have any kind of a quagga mussel. I noticed like a inspection going into our Colorado River, to my knowledge, or into Lake Havasu. Have you heard of any? Is there any? I know some all these people from other states, and even in California and Big Bear, they can't put even a brand new boat in the water unless it's inspected first.
That's a great question, Commissioner. I know that, I don't know if Jeremy Palmer, our Parks representative, is on remotely, or if something that you can answer for us, but I would assume that our Parks
Future
representatives,
presentation.
since we have Davis Camp and things like that, are very closely tied to state Fish and Wildlife folks. And I know that I've heard that they have a program, or at least a media campaign, to inspect your vessel before you put it into the waters. I mean, do you know anything else additional? We could certainly come up with more information if you don't.
Chairman Lingenfelter, Commissioners, I don't have specific information in terms of the current practice, but it's quite my understanding that there is no activity of such at Davis Camp in regard to the boat launches. But
Perhaps you could send the commissioners some follow-up data on what programs there are in the state, and if any of those are operating in Mojave County when it comes
Absolutely.
to quagga mussels. I
And
appreciate
only reason I bring it up, Commissioners, Chairman, is because they talked about the amount of money we spend on protecting our waterways, our water supply, pump stations, and these things are devastating and all that. So it seems like it would be a good thing. That's it.
Thank you. Commissioner Supervisor-elect Martin.
Recently, I was back in Oklahoma, and they have a lot of windmills and solar stuff back there. And I was able to talk to a couple of individuals that know a lot about those windmills. And it just absolutely blew me away when I learned what it costs to put a single one of those windmills out there, and the amount of resources that are needed to build those things, and that the bottom line is, no matter how long they're out there, they will never, ever produce enough electricity to pay for the cost of them to be installed. I found out that like there's between 300 and 500 yards of concrete required for each one of those bases on those windmills, depending on how big the windmill is. And when you find out how much oil is needed to keep those things going, and how much land is affected by all that, it was amazing to me, because I did get to talk to the concrete guys, and they were telling me that each one of those windmill pedestals requires literally a truckload of rebar, steel rebar, like 1 inch in diameter, and an actual truckload for each one. Now, when I'm looking at those windmills up on 93 and how many are out there, I think of how much natural resources were used to build those things, and yet what are going to be the end result? Will we ever see a positive, payback? And we never will. So when we see, as this commission and as a county, when we see these different kind of projects being proposed, especially the windmill stuff, and now I'm trying to get information even on the solar panels, how much concrete is used on those. And back there, they got rain, they got water everywhere. So they got green stuff underneath their panels, and I'm telling them, come to Mojave County, find green stuff under there that you can let wildlife or even domestic go underneath them to graze. It's a apples and oranges deal. But I'm going to find out now how much concrete, how much steel is being used in each one of those solar panels, because we've got these projects being proposed for 8,000 and 10,000 acres to convert our public lands into single use. And people back there, some of the people say, oh no, you can have multiple use. I said, you may have something in Oklahoma where you get 35 inches of rain, but you go to the Mojave Desert and they get 5 inches of rain, and you're not producing a lot of forage out there, and it's just not right. And because they were asking me, why are you upset about this? And I told them, you don't live there. I do. You do. And we don't want to see those things. And what's being forced down our throats is to look at this, and we find out they're not even going to pay back what's being used in the form of energy. And these windmills, where's that energy going? Is it staying in Mojave County? Is it helping our infrastructure? Is it helping our business community? Heck no. It's going to Washington and Oregon and Northern California. So this whole green energy thing, I'm hoping that President Trump is going to put the kibosh on that, because it's a waste of money. They supplement these people back there. They were all laughing about how much money those little companies that start off little, the federal government gives them these money to start these things, knowing full well they'll never pay back what they say they'll do. So we have to stay on top of this. And if we don't, we're going to end up looking like Southern Nevada. And I sure as heck, my perspective as a resident and as a county resident, I do not want to see Mojave County become a solar field paradise. And I think probably the majority of our citizens believe that too.
Thank you very much. Sister Kinch, I'm going to ask you if you have any comments.
Thank you for asking. It was a wonderful presentation. I was looking forward to that. And no comments at this time. I hope that the commission does look at what Supervisor Martin was discussing in possibly creating some sort of energy overlay to say we do or don't like that type of energy, but I think that's future. And thank you for having me here today.
Absolutely. What I would say about Commissioner Martin's comments, I'm very proud of what our past Board of Supervisors has done when it comes to where these utility scale renewable energy projects can be sited on lands that are within the authority of the Board of Supervisors to make a land use determination as far as use. Those now can only be sited in industrial zones and not close to residential, unless it goes to the board and they make some sort of a spot zoning determination or something. Where our problem is, again, it relates to this presentation, is on federally managed lands. And as a cooperating agency, they're supposed to give our comments as a county additional weight on where those should be sited, whether they're a good fit, whether they're not a good fit. But that's really the only control we have. And so again, I think it all goes back to this state of Utah lawsuit and the efforts at Mojave County. This isn't going to go away. This isn't going to go away. Hopefully it gets better under the Trump administration. It's been awful under the Biden administration from my perspective as a conservative. So at least we have hope. If there's nothing else, I just want to say thank you all. Oh, Commissioner Martin.
I have one other thing. I'm going to be relinquishing my position on this commission because I'm going to be on the Board of Supervisors. What I need people from District 4, and I didn't realize I could only pick from District 4. I was thinking countywide, but if anybody from District 4, and I think the county's going to advertise this, that anybody that would like to take this position, my position here on the commission, they need to contact us and let us know so that we can keep this position filled and keep the work going, because obviously we have to keep it going. I hope that as a supervisor that I'll be able to support what Chairman Lincolnfelter said. We've got to do this, and it's important that the public get involved. So anybody out there that's listening to this or knows about us and what we're doing that would like to apply for a position from District 4, please let me know. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And with that, I want to just say thank you all. Happy New Year. Look forward to working with you in this capacity, or if I don't end up being the chairman in District 1's capacity. But thank you all for your efforts, and we are adjourned.